Now, we all know that Bleach has a massive cast of characters, including characters made up of different factions, of different races, each with their own unique powers and abilities. And of all of those characters, I think the Fullbringers are some of the most interesting. They're an often maligned group of characters that people don't particularly like very much. They are associated with one of the most unpopular sections of Bleach, but for me, I find them to be really, really fascinating. Personally, I quite like their designs, and I think Kubo did a really good job of taking human enemies and giving them creative and interesting powers. Sure, they're not the most powerful of characters in the series, but I don't think they were ever necessarily supposed to be. And instead, I quite like the role they've filled in the Bleach universe. So in this video, I'm going to look at every Fullbringer in the series and try and rank them from the weakest all the way through to the strongest, and we'll see who comes out on top. I'm going to be including both Chad and Orihime in this list. Chad was canonized as part of Xcution, he's part of their group in the manga, he is a Fullbringer. And as for Orihime, I don't have a clue. I put out a poll yesterday to try and get the general consensus from you guys as to whether or not you considered Orihime a Fullbringer, and the poll results reflect mostly how I feel about it as well, whoppingly in favour of her being a Fullbringer. And to me, it just makes perfect sense. She's attached to her hairpins, and that seems to be where her power stems from. I know that Aizen mentioned that her being in the proximity of the Hogyoku helped her powers awaken, but I do think she feels like a Fullbringer more than anything else, and if she's not, then we have absolutely no idea what she is anyway. So I'm going to include her in this list. I'm happy to do that. If you don't feel she's a Fullbringer, then obviously you can just strike her from the list, no problem at all, but they're both going to be featured in this list. Like I said, while the Fullbringers aren't the strongest guys in Bleach, they do have really weird and obtuse abilities. Some of them are super vague, and a lot of them don't necessarily feel like they are well suited for battle. So on this list, much like the Sternritters and the captains before, we're going to look at these characters based on a whole number of factors, their abilities, but also their mindset, their general attitude to battle, and how apt and how good they are at fighting in general. So without further ado, let's get on with this list. Luck would have it we have an exact number of 10 Fullbringers to go through, so let's begin. But before we begin, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, guys, you are in absolutely the right place. If you've stumbled across this channel today, make sure to hit the subscribe button now. We do videos like this for Bleach every single week. Give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. It really helps with the exposure on YouTube, and hit the notification bell to stay up to date with every video I do. Make sure to follow me over on Twitter. That's one of the best places to get in touch with me to talk about Bleach. And also don't forget to join our Discord, the link you'll find in the description below. It's just a great place for Bleach fans to hang out. Kickstarting our list, then we have Jacky Tristan. Now, I'm not saying she's weak just because she's at the bottom of this list. However, I do feel her Fullbring Dirty Boots is probably one of the weaker Fullbrings out there, but also has the least potential to grow. Her ability is incredibly simple. Basically, the dirtier her boots get, which is her Fullbring, the stronger she becomes. And it seems to translate into physical strength really only. She becomes more agile. She's even able to distort her leg, it looks like, to try and get a hit round on Renji and Ichigo later on. But really, everything we've seen from Jacky is just not that impressive. She seems to have a pretty limited moveset. She fights Ichigo when she trains him, and even then, an Ichigo who is fairly depowered is able to get the upper hand over her. So Jacky, to me, is definitely a case of she's a good fighter, she's a strong fighter, with speed, physical prowess, agility, but really she doesn't have it that good. Characters like Renji, in probably one of the most embarrassing beatdowns in the arc, if not the series, is able to just completely stand there and tank every hit she throws at him, even in her powered up version of her Fullbring. It's a bit of a shame because I do think that she could have been a really cool fighter. I enjoyed her fight with Ichigo in the training session. She did seem to know what she was doing. She seemed to know what she was talking about. Although Ichigo does speak down to her a bit, basically saying that, you know, you don't have that much experience as a fighter. Not just talking to Jacky alone in that sense, but a blanket term for most of the Fullbringers, and it's true, it does apply to them all. So while Jacky is very skilled at hand-to-hand combat, she's probably not as good as characters like Soifon or Yoruichi, characters who have centuries of battle experience. But considering Jacky is only a human, it does seem to be that she would have grown probably exponentially stronger had she not lost her Fullbringer in the end, but definitely she is a little bit disappointing. Renji absolutely destroys her, like he completely knocks her out just with the hilt of his Zanpakuto toe, and of course Renji is one of, if not the strongest vice captains in the series, but regardless, it is a bit of a shame, and Jacky probably comes in at last on this list. Fullbringer number 9 on the list is a bit of an underdog character, and it's Shishigawara Mo, the follower of Tsukushima Shukuro who used to worship the ground he walked on. Now, Mo has a pretty interesting Fullbring in Jackpot Knuckle. It's a probability and luck-based power, which is kind of vague, it's a bit weird how it works. But essentially, he has a good chance of pulling off a pretty impressive move. Jackpot Knuckle allows him to score a jackpot on an opponent. In the battle against Ikkaku, he pulls off a pretty impressive feat, scoring a jackpot and snapping Hozakimaru in half with his bare fist. Now that's pretty good. However, Shishigawara's biggest letdown for him, and pretty much the main reason he is number 9 on this list, is he is incredibly young. The guy is still in school, he has no experience whatsoever pretty much, and he doesn't even know that Jackpot Knuckle has a weakness. He has to find it out to his detriment during his battle with Ikkaku. Now, one of the main themes of the Shinigami versus Xcution battles is this idea of mentorship, is the idea that the Shinigami have been around for a long time, doing this for a long time, and these Xcution guys are kind of like stepping up to the plate, giving it all large, talking big to the Shinigami when really they don't know what they're doing. And Shishigawara in particular is very out of his depth, and the mere fact that he's able to actually challenge Ikkaku at all is pretty impressive. His lack of experience is the biggest factor holding him back, however, but I have no doubt that further in the future, when he kind of gains a better grasp of Jackpot Knuckle, I think he'd be really formidable. But for now, I think 9th is fair for this guy. Although his power is very unpredictable, he manages to snap a bit of Cross of Scaffold's guard. And also, I think he says he flips a coin, and he's able to loosen the screws in a chandelier. That one's a bit weird. I'm not entirely sure how that factors into Jackpot Knuckle as a whole, because from that point on, you see him punching things only, so I don't really know how he can control probability in that sense, but regardless, I think 9 is pretty good for Shishigawara. In 8th place is a bit of a fan favourite with Riruka Dokugamine. So Riruka is the epitome of one of these characters that has a super vague, super weird ability that doesn't seem like it would be useful in any way for battle with her Dollhouse Fullbring. Now, Dollhouse allows her to take something she finds cute and put it in somewhere else. That's the essence of her power. It is moving objects around, putting things inside something else, and it's just kind of weird. Like, I don't think it's that useful in a fight situation. In fact, you see her fighting Rukia, you see what I assume to be the ultimate form of Dollhouse, which is Riruka inserting herself into another object. She goes inside Rukia, but this is a really weird ability because it doesn't seem to have any negative effects. Rukia falls unconscious for a little while, but after that she seems absolutely fine, and Riruka eventually just jumps out of her chest to stop Tsukushima's attack, but it doesn't seem to have any negative effects on Rukia at all, so again, not all that suitable for battle. I do think Riruka is pretty proficient as a Fullbringer. She definitely seems to be one of the more skilled members of the group. It's just that Dollhouse itself is a weird ability, and it also doesn't really have that much versatility. She can basically just put something in a box, and that's kind of that. It's very different to, say, Yukio's Invaders Must Die, which we'll get into later, which in essence is the same ability, but with considerably more versatility. Riruka mainly fights with the Love Gun, which is an extension of Dollhouse in the way that it's all about putting things into something cute, but then from this one she actually fires them out, such as when she fires a cupboard at Rukia. Again, it's not all that potent, and I think it's mostly played up for a cutesy comedic moment, so that's why Riruka is quite low on this list. I just don't think she's that skilled as a fighter. I don't think Dollhouse lends itself to fighting. Dollhouse, much like a lot of these Fullbrings actually, seems to be mostly conceived just as a way to help Ichigo train. Dollhouse is just a glorified training ground for Ichigo, so trying then to apply it to a battle scenario, things get a little bit messy. Character number 7 on our list. Now, I do wonder if this might be the first controversial placement so far, but it's actually Giriko Kutsuzawa. Now, Giriko is again another really weird character, and Giriko kind of annoys me, to be honest, because I actually really liked his character when he was first revealed, pretty much up until the reveal of him being a villain. I liked his cool, calm and collected personality. He seemed to be one of the more level-headed members of the group, especially when you compare him to Riruka. And his Time Tells No Lies power was really sinister and really cool, with the potential for it to be really, really powerful. The general gist of Time Tells No Lies is that Giriko is able to make a contract with God, supposedly, which then allows things or certain events to happen based on a time limit. Once again, this feels like another ability that was conceived purely to help Ichigo train, as Giriko puts a time limit on Mr. Pork, the enemy that Ichigo is fighting, which turns him into a behemoth. However, much later on when Giriko is revealed to be a villain, you get to see his final form of Time Tells No Lies, and unfortunately it barely does anything. Unfortunately for him, he's going up against Kenpachi Zaraki, and this really highlights the idea that Giriko and the other Fullbringers had absolutely no perception of the people they were fighting, because he mouths off and he just gets taken out in a single hit by Kenpachi. Now, we do get to see something that the full version of Time Tells No Lies is able to accomplish, but it's again really, really weird, and certainly not what I had in mind for this Fullbring when we first saw it. I thought we were going to get a bit more of the whole Flames of Time. I loved that concept. I thought it was really, really cool how if you betrayed the terms of your contract, you would be just burnt away. I thought that was really awesome, really sinister, and I love the fact that Giriko's own eye was burnt out by this time, this Flames of Time. But you don't see any of that, and I think basically what happened here is that Kubo decided he wanted to start rushing through these fights a little bit, and Giriko was the real casualty here, because he has what I would assume to be quite a Fullbring with quite a bit of potential to be quite deep. But Kubo reduces it to its simplest form. Giriko even says that. He says, the amount of power I get is based on how simple my contract's terms are, and as I want to fight you, I'm going to make it the most simple as I possibly can be, and just ask for power. And apparently this translates to just hulking him out. He literally turns into a Hulk, essentially. He becomes immensely muscular. The anime makes him green, and Kenpachi cuts him in half, and unfortunately that's all you get from Time Tells No Lies. Before he gets the ultimate version of his Fullbring, he can do some other weird moves, like he throws clock face numbers at Ginjo that just sort of blow up on him, which I always found to be quite amusing. Kind of neat, I guess. I like the way he sort of swings his pocket watch like a weapon. But yeah, Giriko is a real case, I think, of wasted potential, especially with an ability like that. It could have been really cool, but Kubo didn't feel like showing it. So I think Giriko, 7th place, is unfortunately pretty fair for this character. Number 6 on our list is Chad, one of Ichigo's best friends who was revealed to be a Fullbringer in this arc, and it does make a lot of sense. However, I always thought that Chad's Fullbring should have been his amulet that he received from his abuelo, because obviously he cares greatly about his abuelo, but also his abuelo gave him the mantra he lives his life by, like that whole thing about how you're a giant but you shouldn't use your power against people. That's what Chad lives his life by. So the fact that there wasn't his Fullbring was kind of weird to me, but I do like the fact that he's proud of his skin. I think that makes a lot of sense for his character as well, because he's been bullied about it a lot in the past. But the problem with Chad is, and the reason Chad is relatively low on this list, is we know his Fullbring inside and out compared to most of these guys. Chad is spotlighted more than pretty much every character on this list, and because of that, we know how many times Chad has lost. We know the limits of his powers, and they're just not that great. You know, like the brazo izquierdo del diablo, the right arm of the giant. They're just not that good. Chad's major win was against Gantenbane, and he's never really had one since. He gets one shot by Noitara, he gets decimated by Kyoraku. He fights some statues in the Thousand Year Blood War arc. Yeah, thanks for that, Kubo. But really, Chad has just had a string of kind of embarrassing losses throughout the series, and that has to be attributed to his powers. They're clearly not that great. I will give Chad his dues, however, compared to the rest of the characters on this list, or most of them anyway. He definitely has a clearer sense of battle. He understands battle more than most of them do. And that is obviously a result of fighting alongside Ichigo and fighting these enemies throughout the entire series. Chad has that battle experience that most of them sorely lack. Despite that, and despite some powerful abilities like La Muerte, Chad unfortunately has to rest roughly halfway on this list just because he has had so many defeats and so many losses throughout the series of Bleach. His Fullbring clearly is just not that powerful overall, especially when you consider the second half of this list, the top 5. A lot of them kind of trespass on the realm of God, which is a bit of a theme throughout the top 5 on this list. So, unfortunately for Chad, we're going to have to leave him there and move on to the top 5. Speaking of Ichigo's friends, number 5 on this list is Orihime Inoue. And as I mentioned at the start of this video, I don't even really know whether to consider her a Fullbringer or not. But now that she's on this list at 5, and I think it's pretty fair. Her abilities are obviously unquestionably godlike. Even Aizen himself says that she trespasses on God's domain, which is pretty high praise. However, we know the biggest drawback for Orihime is that she has zero bloodlust. She has no killing intent whatsoever. Kisuke even says that to her at one point. She just doesn't have that killing drive, which, not everyone has. And Orihime's major strengths lie in defense and healing. She's a supporting character for the team. Now, obviously, she's incredibly good at this. She defends against Yuha Bark's attacks in the final battle in the series, bearing in mind at this point he has absorbed the Soul King. So if that's not Orihime on God's domain, I don't know what is. But the fact that she doesn't have that killing intent does hold her back a little bit. Her powers are pretty impressive. They are almost like reality warping in some instances. She can bring people's body parts just back out of nowhere. There doesn't have to be anything left. Earlier in the series, in the Waco Mundo arc, she pretty visibly revives Menali Malia from the dead. And I think this was retconned away, because later on in the 1,000 Year Blood War arc, she can't apparently resurrect any of the dead Arancars around her, which I think was a necessary change. I think that power was pretty broken, being able to bring people back from the dead. But regardless, Orihime at 5 I think is pretty fair enough. It's just, again, it's kind of weird, because you can't... Some characters can beat others just because of their abilities being weird. Like Yukio, for instance, traps Orihime in a cage in the Lost Agent arc, and she literally can't do anything. Despite having the power to reject phenomena, she can't do anything because that's the rules of Yukio's world. So I think having her at 5, having her smack bang in the middle of this list is pretty fair, because she doesn't necessarily have what it takes to take those powers of her and apply them to a combat situation where she can actually fight. That's not to say she doesn't fight, though. She has actually wounded people in the past, Ginjo Kugo being the one character to actually be seriously injured by her because of her reflexive bomb attack. When you hit her shield, it detonates and deals a pretty serious amount of damage. But yeah, I think 5th is pretty fair for Orihime. Speaking of God's domain, next up we have character number 4, which is Yukio Hans Vogelburner. Now, Yukio is a really interesting character. He was actually one of my favourite members of Xcution during reading this series weekly. And his Invaders Must Die is very powerful. Essentially, it's an upgraded version of Riruka's dollhouse, where Riruka can put people into her dollhouse. After that, her agency is mostly gone over that person, but Yukio has complete control over the game world that he puts people in. His Invaders Must Die is essentially a PSP, which I actually kind of liked, but he can put someone in this world, and then from that point on, he has complete control over it. Such as when I mentioned earlier, when he traps Orihime inside this cage that just completely shuts her out. She can't do anything, because that's just a rule in this game world. Yukio is one of the characters as well that benefits the absolute most from getting Ichigo's Fullbring, as it allows his Invaders Must Die to leave the game world and affect the real world. At this point, his ability, now known as Digital Radial Invaders, is on almost like a whole new level, and he's able to create Kyoka Suigetsu style illusions. He creates a perfect fake version of himself, which is enough to fool Ikkaku, and he can basically summon these digitized beams of energy to attack people with. One of them almost strikes Ikkaku. But I think perhaps most importantly are the illusions that he can create. He can create almost entire worlds. When Ichigo thinks he's attacked all 4 of them, Yukio reveals that actually it wasn't a successful hit, but it was closer to, but enemy evaded the attack. And he reveals that he fabricated the entire area in front of them, including his fellow Fullbringers. That level of authenticity, the fact that he's able to fool people like that, is very, very impressive. He does something similar to Hitsugaya. When Hitsugaya fights him, Yukio reveals that he's able to just change the world as he sees fit. The world gets kind of blown up around them and Yukio rebuilds it. Yukio also summons real like organic monsters to the field to attack Hitsugaya as well, which fuels this idea that he has like this kind of god complex. Ultimately, it's Yukio's inexperienced nature and also his childlike nature that costs him the battle against Toshiro. Toshiro completely outsmarts him by remaining cool and collected, whereas Yukio just loses his mind. Again, showcasing the difference between a Fullbringer and a captain class Shinigami on the battlefield. They are two completely different things. And while I do really like Yukio, he did kind of lose his composition after the personality reveal. He did kind of, lose that stoicism and almost like that intelligence. He's obviously very clever, but he did start to allow himself to be easily kind of manipulated by Hitsugaya in that fight. So that's mostly why he's 4. His powers are very, very strong. And again, much like Shishigawara, but on an even bigger scale, I think give Yukio a few years and he'll be pretty formidable. Now we're entering the top 3 Fullbringers on our list, and number 3 is one of my favourite characters in the entire series, Shukuro Tsukushima. Now, Tsukushima was the main villain for the Lost Agent arc for pretty much the longest time until we found out about Ginjo, and because of that, he's got to be pretty tough, to take on that role. He has to fight Ichigo, he has to fight Ginjo, and then later on he fights Byakuya as well, so that's running the gamut of captain level enemies. Tsukushima is just a normal human at the end of the day, but he's clearly very competent with a sword, having been trained by Ginjo from a young boy, and Ginjo obviously being a substitute Shinigami has knowledge of the sword. Tsukushima is very capable at fighting. He takes on Byakuya, not with ease, but certainly he's in control of that fight for the majority of it. He also fights Ichigo. Now, Ichigo is kind of in a bit of a rage during that fight, so he does get a one-up on Tsukushima, but Tsukushima is mostly just there to push Ichigo to a point of despair. And then earlier on in the series, he fights Ginjo in a pretty basic sword fight, but he does pretty well out of it as well. But let's not kid ourselves, the major reason Tsukushima is number 3 on our list is because of his ability, Book of the End. Book of the End is unquestionably one of the most dangerous and powerful abilities in Bleach. By simply cutting someone, Tsukushima can insert himself into their past as any kind of person of note, whether that's a friend, a colleague, a lover, someone like a mentor or a comrade. Tsukushima can do that and the person will believe it to be so, and everything will alter around them to essentially reflect that. But things also change for Tsukushima as well, and this is probably one of the most powerful aspects of this ability in my opinion. When he cuts Byakuya during their fight, already pretty impressive that he's able to land a hit on a captain class opponent, especially one as fast as Byakuya. Tsukushima puts himself into Byakuya's past as his mentor. Now, he says that he's taught Byakuya everything he knows. What this means is that Tsukushima now knows how to combat Gokei, Senkei, Hakuteken, without actually knowing how to do it. But that information is fed into Tsukushima because of his ability. That's what's so powerful about this. Book of the End is able to make the lie feasible. Essentially, it can account for the differences between the two of them. Byakuya is obviously light years ahead of Tsukushima in terms of everything, but by cutting Byakuya, Tsukushima is able to leapfrog to his level. That's the crazy thing about this power. Byakuya comments on how disappointed he is that his 2 years of training will become worthless against Tsukushima, but Tsukushima says, actually, you have gotten stronger, it's just I've grown by the same amount. So that's a really, really crazy ability of Book of the End, and I feel like it gets overlooked a little bit as well, but he is able to account for the differences between them because of his ability. Book of the End doesn't even stop there either. Tsukushima can use it on inanimate objects. He's able to lace their battle arena with traps. Just by cutting Book of the End, he can act as though he's been there many times in the past. It's a ridiculously powerful ability. And really it does kind of carry Tsukushima. He's obviously, like I said, a very capable fighter. And apparently incredibly resilient because he's able to get back up again despite having a hole blown through his chest. But yeah, I think it's very fair to put Tsukushima at 3rd because Book of the End is just one of the most devastating powers in the series. Now, number 2 on our list of Fullbringers is another one of my absolute favourite characters, and that is Ginjo Kugo, the first substitute Shinigami and the former leader of Xcution. Ginjo's a bit of a weird one. There's not all that much to say about this guy. Unlike everyone else, he doesn't have some absolutely ridiculous ability. His Fullbringer is Cross of Scaffold, which transforms his necklace into a massive awesome looking broadsword, and obviously he is very, very capable with that weapon. And that's kind of what sets Ginjo apart from the rest of the Fullbringers. Whereas so many of them rely on their Fullbrings to try and win in a fight, Ginjo very clearly has that battle knowledge, that battle expertise that sets him apart from everyone else. He's able to go toe to toe with people like Ichigo and Uryu together, captain level opponents. Ginjo is able to fight them on pretty even ground for the most part. That's not to say he doesn't have any special abilities whatsoever. He's able to take the Fullbrings and the abilities of other people, including characters like Ichigo, where he's able to use Getsuga Tensho no problem whatsoever after taking it from him. Being a substitute Shinigami, Ginjo is made up of pretty much the same components as Ichigo, which again makes him uniquely powerful and another substitute for the Soul King. Because of this, however, Ginjo also has a bit of hollow in him as well, and he's able to use abilities like Sero when he's in his Bankai form, which really shouldn't be overlooked. Again, I can't say too much about Ginjo because he doesn't have ridiculous abilities, but I actually kind of like that. I think it's very refreshing. I think what's most important here is to consider Ginjo's personality compared to the rest of them. Despite being a villain, he's very, very smart, he's pragmatic, he's effective, and he's efficient in battle, able to take on two opponents at once. Now, admittedly, when they both activate their Bankais, Ginjo and Ichigo does seem to school him pretty hard, but I would assume that's because Ginjo is kind of getting to the point where he's about, almost, not ready to give up necessarily, but he feels like things are getting a bit hopeless. Ichigo is not acting the way he wanted him to, and Ichigo in his Bankai is just on a whole nother level of power. I would have loved to have seen Ginjo do more in the Thousand Year Blood War arc. Thankfully, Can't Fear Your Own World really does expand on the Fullbringers as a whole, really tells you a bit more about these guys, about their powers, about their connection to the world and the Soul King as a whole, and Ginjo takes on some pretty tough opponents, including some Sternritter. So Ginjo I'm pretty confident putting on second place on this list. I think he deserves it, primarily because he's very skilled in combat, he has a lot of experience, he has the intelligence compared to most of these Fullbringers, and he is very powerful with some impressive Reiatsu of his own. But speaking of Can't Fear Your Own World, number one on our list is the Can't Fear Your Own World exclusive Fullbringer Ora Michibane. And I hope I'm pronouncing that right because I really don't actually know. But this character is really interesting. She is a very unique type of Fullbringer. Now, from what I know about this character, I'm not going to profess to know everything because I simply haven't read all of Can't Fear Your Own World yet. But from what I know, Ora is different from most Fullbringers. Most Fullbringers have something that they're very attached to, whether that's Ginjo's pendant, Tsukushima's bookmark, something like that. Ora has none of that. She was raised in a featureless basement by her very, very overprotective father, and because of that she had nothing to grow attached to, outside from her own Fullbring powers. So Ora becomes very proud of these powers she has, and because of that, she can use them to a degree that no other Fullbringer can get anywhere near close to. She's able to manipulate matter completely freely, make her own body completely intangible. She goes toe-to-toe with Kisuke Urahara, who compares her to Aizen, which is pretty glowing praise. If I had to make some kind of a comparison, basically if you imagine a Shinigami with no Zanpakuto, so they can't use Zanpakuto, but they've absolutely mastered everything else to a degree that nobody else can. So they can use Kido in an earth-shattering sense, they can use Shunpo incredibly well, Hakudo incredibly well, they can do everything but use Zanpakuto. That's basically Ora. She has no proper Fullbring, but she can use everything else just on a completely different scale. Like her matter manipulation abilities are just completely godlike. I think her powers are even referred to as miracles. It's pretty on the nose with the god imagery with Ora. She is now the leader of Xcution, which is now a religious cult of all things. And I think it's very, very telling that she has this kind of insane power. And it's pretty cool to see a Fullbringer on this level of power, because as I said at the start of the video, they were mostly small fry compared to the Shinigami they fought. So this was really neat to see a Fullbringer with this level of strength. And I think Ora pretty much unquestionably deserves the number one spot. The elemental dragons she can summon are able to contest Hado 99, Goryu 10, Metsu, so I really think there can be no denying that Ora is probably the strongest of all the Fullbringers. But that's just my list, that's just my opinion of the Fullbringers from the weakest through to the strongest. This was, again, a pretty tough one. Unlike the Soul Reapers, they are more similar to the Sturmers, and their powers are difficult to quantify. A lot of them are very weird, but I hope you'll agree with at least some of the positions on my list. If you don't, please let me know your ranking in the comments below. I'd absolutely love to see them. I'd love to see where you guys have ranked the characters. And like I said, I like the Fullbringers. I enjoy the concept of Fullbringers, and I think their designs on the whole were really nicely done, and I think they uniquely slot into the Bleach universe as a really cool subset of individuals. But that's it from me, guys. Make sure to hit the sub button if you haven't subscribed already. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, and let me know if you enjoyed the video. But until next time, guys, I shall catch you later, and I'll see you then.